Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I'm your host, Dave Markel, coming to you from the Long Valley studio in Washington, Utah. Most of you already know the foundation of this podcast, but for those of you who are new here, I want you to know that this show serves a dual purpose. First, it provides a safe space for victims and survivors of rape or sexual assault to share their experiences to facilitate healing. Secondly, it educates listeners on the principles of a trauma-informed response, going beyond superficial understanding to foster effective advocacy and positive action. The goals of this podcast are to promote healing and provide a furthering of your knowledge about the prevalence of rape culture in our communities and how being trauma-informed is a powerful step in reducing that prevalence. Thank you for joining me today. I'm glad you're here. This is episode 133, and my guest this week is a colleague from the same former career as mine, law enforcement, and who is currently championing the same work I do in training and consulting a trauma-informed approach to handling and investigating sexual assault and rape cases. It's an honor to have Matt Stegner here. Matt does an excellent job at describing his background and his work as this interview gets underway, so let's just get right to it, and I'll catch you on the other side. Here's Matt. Matt Stegner, welcome to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you here. It's something I've been wanting for quite a while. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, right back at you. I'm very grateful for the opportunity and excited to be here with you.
Thank you. Matt, if you would, tell everybody who you are, what you're about, things you've done, your experience, and what you're doing now.
Yeah, a long, winding road, I guess, as far as being here with you now. I became a police officer at the age of 21. I'm from Buffalo, New York, originally. Moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and worked for the City of Atlanta Police Department for 4 years. And then my then girlfriend, now wife, we wanted to get back to New York, so ended up returning home and becoming a member of the New York State Police. And the setup with the New York State Police, also known as the New York State Troopers, is a bit different in New York. It's not just highway or that kind of law enforcement. It is really designed to cover areas that don't have their own police department and also supplement areas that do. And there's two parts of the New York State Police. Everybody starts off as a trooper, with the Stetson on and traffic stops and responding to 911 calls, but they have an investigative wing called the Bureau of Criminal Investigation. And that's the shirt and tie division, analogous to detectives in any other department. And after about 16 years in uniform between Atlanta and the troopers, I applied to become a member of the BCI, was appointed to that position, and ended up in a couple very rural areas in New York. And in my mind, I was thinking, okay, I've operated in the city of Atlanta, in the city of Rochester, in New York, and the city of Buffalo. This is child's play. I can handle Farmersville and Yorkshire and Delavan in these rural areas. And it was a real wake-up call regarding what poverty, crimes against children, crimes against adults really happens in these rural, underfunded, understaffed areas. And it was a real eye-opener, and I look at this point as the changing of me being a real warrior-style police officer into, I guess, more of a guardian as it relates to these kind of cases, child abuse specifically, sexual assault, things like that.
Right.
So it kind of springboarded me into this career that you and I have landed in of these kinds of crimes, which again, if you were to ask me at age 21 to design a list of 10 things I'm interested in doing, this doesn't crack it for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. But anybody out there that's involved in it, you see the power of providing an honest response to survivors of these kinds of crimes. And yeah, it started me on a long law enforcement 10 or 15 year run of working these kinds of cases, and ended up interviewing for the Campus Sexual Assault Victims Unit within the New York State Police, where I did solely stalking, intimate partner violence, and sexual assault cases for students at colleges in New York. And then ended up supervising my own squad of 7 investigators at the end of my career for 3 years, and got to pay it forward, which is very, very rewarding. And just always kept my toe in the water on the best way to handle these disclosures, the best way to investigate these. And as you know, the information available is really lacking. And that kind of sprungboarded me into when I retired a year ago into opening my own consulting company where I train nationally and even internationally to law enforcement mostly, but to anybody in the multidisciplinary world on sexual assault and the robust responses around it that I know you and I believe in.
Right. Absolutely. Matt, that brings me to a really important question that I've had in my mind. And I knew a little bit about your history from listening to you speak at the End Violence Against Women International Conference last summer. And I had read about you. And I love the history of how you evolved into doing what you're doing now. But I've always wondered, where did that education, where did that insight about being trauma informed and that neuroscience of trauma come from? Where did you pick that up?
So I was really fortunate in that one of my first detective assignments, we had a child advocacy center that had just been built. This was in Cattaraugus County, New York. CAC did not have the bandwidth to pay for full-time forensic interviewers.
Right.
So I was voluntold that I had to get trained and become a forensic interviewer. Forensic interviewing has been around for 35 years. It's backed by science. It's accepted by every court. And you saw the power of asking these open-ended questions in a way, in a soft interview space where you didn't have your firearm on you and different things like that. But I was always confused why when kids turned 18, you snap your finger and that's all out the window. Mm-hmm. There's no CAC anymore. So you send a kid across the country to a college and God forbid something happens and there's no soft interview room. The interview's not recorded. There's no open-ended questioning. May or may not be a trained interviewer on the law enforcement side. So that was the start of it, just like confusion. It was almost analogous to standardized field sobriety tests for driving while intoxicated, that we all across the country would use this model. And then all of a sudden, when it's a different kind of car, we're just going to throw those tests out and kind of figure it out as we go. Mm-hmm. So that really took me into being interested in there's got to be a better way with adults of all ages. But I was really interested in this cutoff, essentially, of this wraparound, robust CAC apparatus. And then survivor turns 18 or the survivor's 18 and the abuse happened when they were a child. We have to spin the roulette wheel and hope they get a proper response. And it's still surprising and confusing that that's still the case. So that was kind of how I first got into it. It's nothing fancy, Dave. I adopt the same principles and ideas that have been around for 35, 40 years with kids, refine them a little bit, tweak it a little bit, and create an environment where survivors are comfortable with giving you the most case facts possible.
Tell me what it means to you, Matt, to be trauma informed.
To me, it's checking myself at the door and understanding that no one knows how they're going to react in a situation. And it's not my job to determine what should or should not have happened in the moments, days, and years leading up to a crime. And I think as a profession, if law enforcement is going to start dictating who they give a proper response to based on perceptions of what should or shouldn't have happened, based on what reactions should or shouldn't have happened, from the lens of law enforcement that is battle tested with active shooter training, that is battle tested with being trained to push through these different parts of the defense cascade, and expecting anyone in the population that we serve to act the way that we think we should have acted, you're asking for trouble. So to me, I always teach and try to live myself that I'm never going to put parts of these traumatic events or defense cascades in my police report, but I'm certainly not going to lose my way when met with an answer that may be confusing to me, such as freezing or immobility or disassociation, but instead recognize this is probably a clue that a traumatic event occurred, and let's move on to the next question.
That's amazing. It's so simply put, but so powerful and so impactful to victims and survivors when they're talking to somebody who has that knowledge and that approach. But a large part of that too, would you agree, is understanding the neuroscience of the brain in trauma. That's completely different than just asking open-ended questions and utilizing the tactics that we were taught in CAC and in Child Advocacy Center and child forensic interviewing. Did you take any courses on neuroscience, or did you have a mentor? What was that process like in terms of that aspect of trauma?
So I was very fortunate, Dave, that I came to know Dr. Jim Hopper pretty early on. I was, in full disclosure, a bit intimidated meeting a doctor from Harvard, thinking that I was going to be able to understand what he was talking about. But his ability to break it down in a way where I'm just shaking my head, yes, 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 as he talks about these burned in or built in mechanisms in such a thoughtful, easy to digest manner, I always say made me a better pro. His teachings, his research, information on his website just made me a better pro. Analogous to if you wanted to be a drug recognition expert, you wanted to inspect commercial vehicles. This is the same professional development that I encourage anyone to avail themselves to. And as a bonus, he's the only doctor from Harvard you'll find that puts all the stuff out there for free on his website.
Amazing.
It's really amazing, man. So I was lucky to stumble into him and his trainings and then jump on his website and continue to learn from him. So that's really where I began to view these disclosures as an honor to receive, but at the same time, having this academic general understanding of the neurobiology of trauma, the different brain-based behaviors, habits and reflexes, things of that nature, to put myself in a position to not lose my way on the disclosure when the information was coming to me.
Can I delve a little deeper into that? How did you meet Jim or become aware of his trainings and his materials that were out there?
When I became a member of the Campus Sexual Assault Victims Unit, there was a lot of, science or individuals in that arena that were talking about trauma-informed responses that I was not aware of in my previous role. I would pick things up here and there from the CAC model, but it wasn't until I was introduced to Dr. Hopper at a training that I saw him speak at, and really, in full disclosure, preparation for the interview for that position, where I just couldn't believe that I hadn't seen him before. So it is interesting, the style of training that law enforcement goes through for certain specialties, scuba diving, SWAT, drone operator. But oftentimes, at least in my experience, you're handed a stack of manila folders as a new detective with the proverbial good luck kid and no background of the neurobiology of trauma, the effects that traumatic events can have on individuals, especially as it relates to recalling memories that we desperately seek or want in the furtherance of our criminal investigation. Very, very grateful, still stay in touch with him to this day, and he's still out there doing his thing, which is great.
He's amazing. We utilized him. I say we. I worked for the Army, as you may or may not know, for the Criminal Investigative Division as a highly qualified expert. And we had a 2-week Special Victims Unit investigation course. And myself and a colleague that also ran that heard about Jim and his work, probably through David Lesak, as one of Jim's instructors. We reached out and he became one of our regular presenters and did, I think, at least one full day. I'm thinking maybe a day and a half of that 2-week course. That's where I met him. That's where I learned about him. That's where I became really good friends with him. And I totally agree with you. What an amazing individual he is. Did you hear his latest presentation that he did at the EVAWI conference on his take on freeze, fight, flight, or fawn?
Was this about changing the terminology from fight or flight to habits and reflexes?
Yeah.
And his deep dive, it's so interesting how American society falls into these buzzwords, but his deep dive onto fight or flight, it was, I don't want to say completely, but definitely misappropriated the word. And he, of course, being him, goes backwards and unpacks the history of that meaning. I am aware of that and I believe was present for that, and definitely fascinating.
Yeah.
Is dealing with that language, what that language means. And, for me, Dave, as a former police officer, I would never want to admit fight or flight. I would always want to say fight. I never would want to admit, I would feel like a failure if I was talking to you and said, hey, the hippocampus kicked in and for whatever reason, my flight mechanism, I'm not going to say that. And, I don't want to admit that.
Yep.
Habits and reflexes sounds a lot better to me.
Exactly. Yeah, I relate to that so deeply.
Yeah.
And let's talk about the other aspect of that in terms of that education that we both received. We have so similar paths. My entire law enforcement career was in a little town outside of Denver, Lafayette, very rural. But I also, when I started training other agencies and my chief started utilizing me to push education on how to investigate sex assault, child sex assault, rapes, and domestic violence cases, again, full transparency, my first years as an investigator, I was one of those investigators that didn't know what I was doing. My approach was totally wrong. I know I messed up cases because I had that mentality that I had been taught, which was that somewhere between 50 and 85% of sex assault and rape cases were false. And I think that's still a prevalent mindset in the general populace, unfortunately. But I had a very interesting phone call from the prosecutor that handled those cases in the Boulder County DA's office. Her name was Mary Keenan, and she called me one day and said, "Dave, you need to come talk to me." And she sat me down and basically said, either you start treating victims correctly and handling these cases correctly, or I'm going to recommend to your chief that you not investigate rapes and sex assaults anymore because you're ruining these cases and you're harming these victims. Because I wasn't believing them. I was looking for reasons to close the cases as quickly as I could. It's embarrassing to admit that, but she said, fix it. And I did. I just started reading and looking into it. Did you also, I know I'm kind of prying into some maybe not so easy to talk about realms of what we did in law enforcement. Did you face any of that too in your career and that learning process for you where there was a time when, as we are training against right now, law enforcement just takes a wrong approach?
Yeah, I'm totally comfortable talking about it. You're not alone. I'm professionally embarrassed at the way that I handle some of these cases. I try to be transparent about that. I want to throw a lifeline out to law enforcement. I really think that we're kind of up against it early on because, as you know, the best and easiest candidates that we do background investigations on to become police officers. I know when I did research and was charged with investigating applicants to become New York State troopers, the best applicants were the ones that didn't grow up with a lot of trauma and chaos around them. Now, I'm not speaking for everybody. We all have our own stuff, but most times the best candidates had two parents in the home. They got in maybe a fight or two in high school. They kept the same job. Certainly did not grow up around, molestation, domestic violence, did not witness this. So for a lot of law enforcement, including me, it was confusion. And unfortunately, confusion when you're wearing a uniform is usually met with putting that confusion back onto the person talking to you. So it is completely confusing to me to associate sex with violence. It's confusing to me that somebody would stay in a home or in a relationship with somebody that's violating them.
Right.
But I didn't grow up with that. So it's easy for me to say it's confusing because I was never in that arena combined with no training. So what do? You put it back on them. Something's not right here. This doesn't make any sense. You must be making it up. And then the second layer of this is, I appreciate your transparency, but I call it skimming your caseload off the top. These disclosures are so delicate and so fragile that it is not hard to convince victims the difficulties in moving forward. And we would, in law enforcement, I think, unfortunately, run survivors through a bit of a gauntlet at the initial disclosure. And if they walk away, it's one less case that we have to close before the weekend. Yeah. And I'm not proud to say that. I'm just trying to reaffirm what you're saying, that you slip into these bad habits without proper training.
And as I look back, I was doing exactly what I was trained to do. I teach this too to this day when I'm in front of a law enforcement audience. What you guys are doing isn't wrong in the sense that you weren't taught to not do that, because my supervisors, my sergeants, other detectives were doing that and teaching me that most victims lie, most victims exaggerate, most victims do everything they can to exacerbate their story and make it worse than it really was. All of those things that we hear in our, what I call the rape culture of thinking that most victims lie. And you're right. It was easy to close those cases, skim off the top, make the caseload lighter by just following what it was that we were taught. That is where I see the problem is that we need to change that fundamental training for newbies, for the rookies, both in patrol and investigators that get promoted up into investigating these types of cases, that they need a much better education base that needs to be trauma informed and neuroscience informed. How do you combat that when you're in front of an audience of law enforcement personnel who have been trained like you and I were and have that mentality? How do you get past that initial hurdle, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I try to be very vulnerable about how bad I was at these and try to walk the line between establishing my credibility but not overdoing it by making it the Matt Stegner show. So I'm certainly going to walk the line of success stories, the latter half of my career, based on these principles versus mistakes first half of my career, and be vulnerable about that, with the caveat that now that, God willing, I'm on the other side of retirement, I like the awards and I love when survivors stay in touch with me, but probably like you, the ones I messed up are the ones that haunt me, the ones that stay with me. And now I'm at an age that I am seeing these people again. That was not an impressive point in my career. And the second, part is I use a couple analogies. I use an analogy where if an individual showed up at a police station or was arrested for a low-level drug offense, drug user, and he or she had information about a large quantity of narcotics or firearms, think about how we handle or deal with that person, an informant that's often still a drug user, often still a drug dealer, often doesn't show up on time, versus a sexual assault victim. So person one, the narcotics informant, we oftentimes get their traffic tickets taken care of. We oftentimes will drive them around. We will pay them. And then scenario number two, or person number two, it's a roll of dice. We marginalize them. We skim off the top. It's a nuisance. We certainly don't pay them. We don't drive them around. And the second example that I give is all I'm asking is to don't play home run ball. And what I mean by that is none of us, myself included, are so good that at that initial disclosure, you can determine whether or not this happened. So I'm asking you to treat it like a DWI or DUI. You pull them over and they may or may not perform that first test exactly how you want them to as far as a DUI. I'm asking you, just like on a DUI that you're going to do 3 or 4 more, I'm asking you to take 4 or 5 more steps on this case and don't get lost on nuances of the disclosure that you don't like. That should not preclude you from collecting physical evidence, from interviewing a disclosure witness, from, hey, talking to the suspect. I call it home run ball again, Dave, where I'm going to vet out this victim in an aggressive manner with language about, are you willing to testify? Are you willing to sign a sworn statement? Are you willing to go to court? This could last for 2 years. Are you sure you want to do this? Just run the rest of your investigation and let's see where it takes us. That's all I'm asking. So those are some things I learned along the way. I try to remember my 21-year-old self sitting in an audience, maybe not being impressed or being impressed, and trying to be vulnerable and not come across as a big shot because I'm wearing a tie and have the clicker.
Oh, I love that. That makes perfect sense. But then you've got the success stories too. Yeah, we've both got those cases that we wish we could take back and redo where we really screwed up.
Yeah.
But then there's those ones where after we did get trauma informed, after we did see the light, as I say,
right,
we actually treat our victims as survivors, as somebody who has told the truth, and we apply those principles of being trauma informed and knowing what the neuroscience is and how the brain works and why they don't remember everything perfectly and why they don't tell things in chronological order. We understand all that, knowing what we know now, and we have these cases that we really feel good about. Can you talk about some of those cases that I think are much more easily highlighted and probably more important to talk about at this point?
Yeah, and I appreciate the opportunity to do that because it is not fun to talk about the ones you screwed up on. But I'm here to say that, from somebody that worked for an agency that didn't have um, a lot of specialized training, no specialized training as it relates to this, to me, after 26 years, the feeling of hearing a disclosure, for example, on a college campus of somebody that said, hey, 5 years ago, this happened, no physical evidence, supposedly no witnesses, and to just follow what I call the 10 steps to consider on your case and follow this each and every time, the feeling of winning a jury trial on a situation or a case like that. On a case, the first half of my career, I would have skimmed off the top and said, this isn't going to work, that this is over.
Mm-hmm.
But not getting lost in why did you wait so long, things of that nature. It's exhilarating, and it doesn't always result in a jury trial and arrest, and I acknowledge that. But your batting average as a detective will go up demonstrably if you follow the cases each and every time all the way through without getting lost in the person verbalizing what happened to them immediately. And I'm living proof of that. I'm living proof of cases that, what would be described as just nightmares or garbage, can go somewhere. And even if you don't make an arrest, in my experience with survivors, if you're giving it all that you have, if you're attempting creative ways to elicit confessions, if you're going back and documenting the crime scene and giving a robust effort, and at the end of it, you're like, this is what we tried. These are the steps we did. Unfortunately, we do believe you, but unfortunately, we did not reach that probable cause or proof beyond a reasonable doubt standard. I have found that most survivors will grace you with, hey, I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And that's all I'm trying to do is communicate like the DWI or DUI, follow these steps, take the information, see where it goes, and you just never know.
So true, Matt. And I think you can probably echo what I'm about to say and agree with it, that oftentimes a survivor just wants to be believed and have their story told in such a way that they feel like they're in control. And sometimes if it does go to court, even if they don't get a conviction, even if the case is lost, they come up to you and say, thank you for everything you did. I feel so much better because I feel like justice was done. I feel like I had my day in court. I feel like you listened and believed, and we did everything we can. As you just said, you've had those survivors say those things to you, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's not always linear or perfect. I, have a case where it was a delayed disclosure, like most of these. It was a college student,
Yeah.
and I was able to, through a non-custodial interview, secure a confession from the suspect, an additional in-custody interview from the suspect, clear documentation of the crime scene, clear disclosure. As you know, Dave, very, very difficult on cases with no physical evidence and no witnesses to accomplish these goals at court. The survivor, had agreed with the district attorney's office to 6 months in jail for the suspect on an attempted rape first degree, sex abuse first, and being on the sex offender registry, and 10 years probation. And while at the courthouse, it was during COVID, the judge would not allow the survivor during her victim impact statement to have an advocate with her, to have me with her, or to have her fiance with her. So she had to walk into that courtroom by herself to see her rapist, who was allowed his mom and dad and his attorney. And after this victim impact statement, the judge took the sentence from 6 months to 60 days and let the defendant walk out to take care of his affairs. And that feeling of sitting in court with her and watching this suspect walk by made me want to throw up. But The reason I share that is it doesn't excuse us in law enforcement from throwing our hands up and not doing our job. A lot of things have to work in concert in order to get the proper justice, in my view. And ultimately, we cannot control all other parts of the apparatus. I know in that case, Dave, I did the very, very best I could. I was thoughtful, connect the survivor to advocacy, 2-part trauma-informed interview, was creative on obtaining a confession, eliciting different utterances. I'm proud of that case. I'm not proud of the outcome, but I share that because this isn't always just going to be wins. Right. This is the human experience, and the term win or lose is a great situation, I guess.
It's very relative.
Yeah. That's the way to put it, relative. Yep.
Yeah. And in retrospect of those types of cases too, Matt, can you talk to my audience? I want to emphasize that my audience is so diverse and multidisciplinary in itself. I mean, there's victims and survivors in this audience, but there's prosecutors, mental health workers, social workers, child advocates, adult advocates, and law enforcement, not just the victim survivor aspect of it. But I would love to hear you talk about the aspect of start by believing and how you view that. I know it's controversial with some agencies, and it was in the military when I worked for the Army, that if you start by believing, you are biased to the victim's or survivor's story right from the get-go. And I don't look at it that way. I know In Violence Against Women International doesn't look at it that way. Do you promote start by believing, and what is your take on how that should work?
I do promote it. In full disclosure, Joanne Archambault has always been very, very good to me, and I would consider her, somebody in my inner circle that really changed the way that I thought about these cases. And I don't want to speak on behalf of her, but that really goes back to the mindset that I talked about of these disclosures are an honor to receive. And it's a mindset to start by believing. If you really read what start by believing means, it's no different than I call an officer here at Orchard Park that says, hey, my home was burglarized. Those officers don't show up at the door and start asking me, do you want to press charges? Are you sure you want to go to court? You left the door unlocked? What do you mean you left the door unlocked? They take the report, ask me investigatory questions, and they go look for the burglar. Yeah. And for some reason, that has changed as it relates to this crime. So I support what start by believing means. I'm also aware that, unfortunately, for whatever reason, this crime has become partisan, which is confusing to me because to me, it's a human rights issue. And to those that are not interested in taking the step to really research what that means, I understand that maybe that phrase could make people think that it's automatically precluding the idea that a false disclosure ever occurs. I'll say this too. So I believe that's about mindset. And number two, ethical above all on these investigations. I am not somebody that, I would love to say that my style of investigating these kind of crimes will right the wrongs of the past. The past is the past. I'm interested in right now and what is the best research-backed, peer-reviewed way to handle these cases. And when you have doctors at Harvard stating that this is the best way to obtain the most case facts possible, how in the world is this partisan? Yeah. How in the world is this controversial? Yeah. Just like the horizontal gaze nystagmus for DUI or DWI. Mm-hmm. That's not controversial. That's not partisan. So to me, I genuinely do not understand when that happens within usually the law enforcement community, the struggling of the start by believing, because it's about a mindset. It's about creating an environment where if, God forbid, this crime occurs to somebody, they feel comfortable and confident coming to law enforcement and reporting it.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if every first responder, every investigator took that attitude? I think we would see a change in culture that I'm constantly talking about. We live in a rape culture. We live in a culture that I think mainly through lack of education and lack of knowledge believes that most victims are lying and believes that victims exaggerate when the exact opposite is true. The research is so heavy towards the fact that victims don't lie. What is it, 92 to 98% of rape and sex assault stories are true. It's a very small percentage that are false reports. But yet we live in this rape culture. Can you talk about rape culture and what your view of rape culture is and what that term means?
Yeah, my reasoning or view of that statement is the default setting oftentimes is that the victim or the survivor is lying. And that is based on a multitude of factors, which is not limited to media, TV, social media, law enforcement. The fact that most of us in law enforcement haven't dealt with this. We haven't had this happen to us.
Yeah.
We're not in relationships where this is occurring. The fact that the profession is male dominated. There's a lot of moving parts around it. And the bottom line is, what if you're wrong? You know, I have 3 kids. What if one of my 2 daughters comes to you and her reaction is not what you would have expected? What if she froze? What if she drank? What if she smoked marijuana? What if you're wrong? And that's what I always tell people is I have stories of being wrong, and it sucks when you're the one that's wrong. So I understand we're busy and law enforcement, but we get paid hourly. So let's follow these cases where it takes us. And again, like any other criminal investigation, if there's a false disclosure, a proper investigation will flood that out. But a home run ball, skimming off the top, whatever phrase you want to use at that initial encounter is not appropriate, it's not ethical, and it's exceptionally damaging, as you know better than anybody.
Yeah, for sure. I could talk to you all day. Matt, could you address your business now of training and consulting and how that's working out for you, how it feels to you to stand in front of an audience and teach this stuff? What keeps you going?
Yeah, it was a very hard decision to retire. I loved being a police officer. It's all I knew from the age of 21 years old, and it's all I ever wanted to be since the age of 12. I knew early on with my personality that I had to remove myself from the arena because, Dave, I can't help myself. I'm not somebody that can slow down. I'm not somebody that can ease into an easier job, an administrative type job. I had to have the handcuffs and the sidearm on me the whole way.
Yeah.
Which is why the highest I went as senior investigator. Not that I could have or couldn't have went higher, but I just loved it so much. So I was really torn about it because, especially in New York, the profession had become very polarized, and there was a lot of, what's the point anyways? Nobody goes to jail, everybody's against us, things of that nature. And I saw that creeping into proper responses around sexual assault and sexual violence. And I just found great reward in giving everything that I had to a younger version of me, and felt like, okay, I'm not going to be a millionaire off of this, but I really feel fulfilled getting a phone call. I just got one yesterday from a detective that took a class that I do here in New York for our version of Post called DCJS. And he wanted to run a case by me. And it just felt so good to hear this 26-year-old kid asking the old grumpy guy my opinion on this case. And I get the same kind of fulfillment from that feedback that I did when I was able to put handcuffs on a suspect, with the bonus that I don't get woken up in the middle of the night anymore. And I think my blood pressure and cholesterol has leveled out a bit since I left. So I've been very fortunate. I made a cognizant decision to stay in my lane and only talk about what I feel comfortable talking about. And I'm in a position where I take on projects, whether it be consulting or training, that is around not getting anybody in trouble or wagging my finger at them, but instead sharing my journey in the hopes of inspiring the next generation. That again, if one of my loved ones or anyone's loved ones comes to any police station, they can expect a trauma-informed response. They can expect to be connected with advocacy, have a soft interview room, robust follow-up and safety planning, and addressing their medical needs. And it might sound simple, but as you know, it is just such a spin of the roulette wheel of what the response is. And when you have survivors disclose to me and you about a poor response, it's heartbreaking because I do love the profession so much. And man, this is so correctable. It's so correctable. I know there's a lot of moving parts on the back end, but the receiving the disclosure and how to do that, and how to investigate these cases, I'm not holding on to anything magical here. I mean, you and I both have it. It's just trying to shoehorn it in for some reason can be challenging.
Yeah. That first response is critical, like you said, and it's an honor to receive stories of rape or sexual assault from someone. We need to have that viewpoint that we are fortunate if the victim or survivor trusts us enough and feels comfortable enough with us to be able to tell what their experience was with that rape or sex assault. Oftentimes, though, the standard for first response is who, what, why, when, where, how. Tell me this, and this. And you and I know, and I think I want the audience to hear that trauma brain of survivor can't do those things very well. And so what do you teach your first responders to do? If we could talk a little bit about that. I don't want to give away,
No, I'm fine with it. Yeah.
What we're out there doing, but I think it's important in this type of a setting with a podcast where there are law enforcement personnel listening. What do you recommend for how they receive that initial disclosure?
I call it the 4 horsemen of things that I'm looking for at that initial encounter each and every time. But if I could step back with a bit of a framework that I always mention, is the International Association of Chiefs of Police put out a document years ago of best practices after a critical incident.
Mm-hmm.
Part of those best practices are gaining the minimal facts needed. So God forbid you or I are involved in a car crash while we're working or a shooting. Obviously, we need that immediate information. Is there a suspect on the loose? Are you okay?
Right.
Do you need medical treatment? But again, that peer review medical data of the following in that document, give the police officer 1 or 2 sleep cycles. When you're questioning the police officer, do not put him in the interrogation room. Allow him a support person, such as a PBA or representative with them. Ask open-ended questions. Understand that he or she might not be able to remember every part of the critical incident, such as how many rounds they fired, such as how fast they were going. Make sure you provide plenty of breaks. Offer water. So I am simply asking the same grace that the International Association of Chiefs of Police recommends for us in the brother and sisterhood onto somebody that's had something horrible happen to them. I'm asking for the same setup. Yeah. So what I teach front-facing first responders, 911 call, or if somebody comes to your station, I'm asking for 4 pillars. The first being, I want to address their healthcare, and potentially any physical evidence. I'm not interested in immediately framing it that you need to get a kit or not get a kit, but instead framing it, I want to make sure you're okay. I want to get you to a hospital, have it checked out by a professional, make sure that you're okay, make sure we address STDs and unwanted pregnancies. As a bonus, almost every state has built in that these kits are going to be stored for upwards of 20, 25 years anyways. So let's get them some medical help. Secondly is a robust safety plan, which is asking a very easy question. Do you feel safe? Yes, I feel safe. This happened 2 summers ago. This was my boyfriend who has since moved out of town. Or, no, I don't feel safe. It's happening right now. And there's things that we need to do to make sure that we don't put the victim back in harm's way.
Right.
The third pillar is connection to advocacy. I don't understand why this is that hard. I am a sympathetic person, but it is not my job, nor am I trained to provide emotional backing to a survivor. But there's these amazing people that want to do it, that want to be there, and connect them to these advocacy groups, not just your systems-based advocates, but the community-based advocates. Connect them to advocacy early and often. And the fourth pillar, which I'm embarrassed to even have to mention, do your job and follow up. When I hear stories of my detective won't call me back, I was unaware that my detective got promoted and my case got transferred over. The DA won't call me back.
Yeah.
I call the station and the voicemail box is full. Dirty contractors don't call back, Dave, not cops. We call back.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And if I could get those four things at every disclosure, that you can make sure that a survivor's physical health is okay, their mental health is okay with advocacy, that we have a safety plan for the short term, that they're going to be okay until we do a more robust follow-up interview, and that you call them back and keep them posted, I'll take it. I'll take it for round one. So
Absolutely.
that's what I teach new officers. If you can give me those four horsemen, I call it, each and every time. And then part two of that obviously would be a properly trained detective for the second part of the interview, ideally in a soft interview room with an advocate in the room, asking questions in a trauma-informed way to elicit the most case facts possible,
Right.
and then go do your job.
Yep. Matt, I'm so glad I asked that question because you have articulated that in such an amazing, insightful, educational way. I hope there are law enforcement personnel out there who will take this to heart if they haven't already. That is so spot on and exactly what is needed from victims. I can't tell you how many times on this show victims and survivors have said exactly what you just mentioned, is that, yeah, I told them my story, but got the feeling they didn't believe me. And when I called to see where the case was in following up, couldn't get a response. They weren't never in the office, or they wouldn't return my phone calls. And prosecutors, same way. You're absolutely right. It's a huge step in correcting these major errors that are happening in these types of cases that would absolutely change the landscape of rape and sex assault in this country and around the world if law enforcement did what they were supposed to do. We'll never prevent sex assault or rape, but I think we would see a definite impact on the prevalence rate. And that's what we're after, is lowering that prevalence rate and bringing down the number of rapes and sex assault cases that happen in our communities. The way you do that is really good enforcement, really good prosecution, and sending the message that this isn't going to be tolerated. To that end, much of what you're doing now, besides training and consulting, has to do with awareness, not only in the communities that you serve, but also in law enforcement. And you are with End Violence Against Women International.
I was in their cadre of experts. That was kind of my starting point into training and consulting. I always appreciated their quality of webinars and had learned so much. That's, again, Dr. Hopper has pieces on there too.
Yeah.
I always really enjoyed their combination of an academic approach with a boots on the ground detective approach, whether it be Joanne before she retired and Ann took over, combined with Kim Lonsway, who's a PhD.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah, I just always appreciated the cop in the room perspective, which Ann and Joanne bring, and then Kim's background to be able to thoughtfully put information out there that just wasn't simply Googled, but rather peer-reviewed and properly vetted. So that was really my connection with them. And then I'm somebody that, again, I know I talked about staying in my lane, but there is a need, and I do speak about this, about men speaking up, men having a role in this. I often get asked, man, Matt, you have 3 kids. Your oldest is a boy. So I have a 21-year-old son, 18-year-old daughter, and 16-year-old daughter. And they often will say, man, you must talk to your daughters all the time about this. And I actually talk to my son more about this, and my expectation of not just him and the way that he operates, but if he sees something, my expectation that if you see somebody that's had too much to drink at college, you're going to make sure that they are safe, that they are secure. If you see something happening that you know is not right, my expectation on you as your dad of what I expect you to do, and not just turn a blind eye. So yeah, certainly there's conversations with my daughters, which I'm sure they'll tell you I have plenty of. But I really think there's an opportunity here for men to step up, whether it's officer-involved domestic violence, officer-involved sexual assault, or just societal issues, being a part of it. I'm not proud of this, but being a Generation Xer, jokes and things the way that we were back when I was younger, I'm not proud of that, but that's the way that I grew up with my friends and things that were said. You see the devastating consequences for survivors with this. So I'm definitely here trying to be part of the change. I know you are too.
And that's much appreciated. I think you're amazing. I think the trainings that I've heard you do are superb, highest end, top shelf training that I think I've ever heard.
Well, that means a lot coming from you. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Matt. But I think you're spot on with so much of this and the whole history with you in terms of how this developed for you, your beginnings in your career, and then that process, like me, handling things wrong and being made aware that there's a better way to do this and there's things that we can do that actually help instead of hinder and harm. And then grabbing hold of that education and moving it forward, not only in your career work, but then now doing the trainings and consultings that you're doing around the country and around the world is so important. It's critical, it's needed, it's necessary, and it needs to expand. Really appreciate all the effort and time that you spend in doing this. Talk a little bit, I don't want to dive into this too deeply because I know it's a huge part of what you train, but there's that guardian or warrior approach. Can you talk just a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think myself, like a lot of young men, became police officers not so much to maybe help victims of crime, but really to get our stories and to get involved in the arena like a war almost. And, the reason I went to Atlanta was part of the Biden-Clinton crime bill, hired a bunch of young police officers to enter these major cities and, quote, clean them up. It was sometimes messy. The beginning of the crack epidemic. It was intense, but for a 21-year-old, pretty fun. It's an easy way to live your life. Black and white policing. I'm good, you're bad. You're a criminal, I'm the good guy. Very easy way to live. So the warrior style really was celebrated by my department. I was nominated for Officer of the Year in Atlanta. When I came home to the New York State Police, I was a Trooper of the Year 5 out of the 6 years at my station in Buffalo. And mostly that just means arresting the most people. But as I got older and started to mature and have my own family, I, shared with you stumbling into the Child Advocacy Center arena and the feeling of having a 7, 8, 9-year-old kid disclosing to you the horrors of what they're going through and the pressure on me to build these cases and bring justice to these kids was just so intense and really sparked this new style of being a guardian, that I could be thoughtful in my interview style, that I didn't soften myself just because I wasn't more aggressive or wasn't more standoffish. That me being a bit vulnerable actually made me a better cop. Now, there were times that I often questioned, man, if I got to bring it, can I still bring it? There were people that were percolating in my department that Matt's all touchy-feely now, and he's doing this trauma-informed thing, and then I was fortunate enough that I had a couple incidents, one critical incident where I was still able to bring it. So I share with people, this isn't an either or. Just like a great doctor, a great surgeon, they can still have good bedside manner. And I'm asking for the same thing. I'm asking that if, God forbid, there's a school shooting, I expect the warrior to kick that door in and take care of business. But that doesn't mean that if my daughter comes to you because something horrible has happened, that you can't check yourself and put yourself in a position to receive information from her in a thoughtful manner.
Right.
And I'm just asking for people to get out of the either or. And I believe in them that they can do both. You can't give up the warrior. We're always going to need it. You know that. It's always got to be there. But it doesn't mean you have to be so darn difficult in these situations where it's not an officer safety issue. This is a different compartment of your brain. Okay, tell me what happened. Are you okay? That's all I'm asking. So for me, it was a tough journey. Lots of personnel complaints, a couple lawsuits early in my career, and my foot was on the gas, and I was about arresting bad guys, and that's always a part of it. But I just want to encourage any officer out there that when you embrace both concepts, they are not exclusive. To me, that's a sign of a real pro. A real pro cop, pro police officer is the ability to be both. I can still bring it. You should still be able to bring it. Doesn't mean you have to be so mean and difficult at these disclosures. It means it can be both. I believe in them.
Thanks for being the perfect example of that. I so admire you for having that attitude and for expressing it and sharing it, because it's critical for law enforcement. It's also critical for our victims and survivors to understand that that's our approach and that should be the approach of law enforcement. I tell people all the time when they ask, should I report my rape or sexual assault? Because I know that there's some horror stories out there.
Yeah.
It's a tough thing to advise somebody yes or no. I always say yes, if you can find an agency that's trauma informed. Ask questions. Ask if they are a trauma-informed agency. Ask if they have a detective that has been through trauma-informed training on the neuroscience and what it means to be trauma-informed. Report to those people. And if you have to search far and wide, find that agency that is trauma-informed.
Yeah, I agree completely. I have a difficult slide that I show one of my trainings of my oldest daughter walking up the stairs. She's a freshman at college. And I remember thinking, and I'm getting older, so if my voice trembles, it's just because I'm getting old and soft. But I remember thinking, God forbid if something happens to her, what happens to so many young women that go to college. I'm not proud of this, but if she called me, I would not send her to the closest police department. I would call around and ask who knows what they're doing, who's got an advocate available, who's going to do this interview in a soft interview room, and who understands the nuances of a sex assault kit.
Yep.
And it's not a guarantee, which is why I'm here, because if somebody was following a drunk driver, what do we say? Call 911. We never asked, does the agency know what they're doing? Because they all know what they're doing on DWI and DUI. And I just want the same for victims of crime to know that your DUI or DWI arrest where you worked in Colorado will be the same as mine in New York. And I would love to have the same conversation around sexual assault, that I know it's going to be uniform.
That's so good. Yeah.
Then I can be done and do something else.
You're so spot on. Yeah, absolutely. Matt, let's wrap things up and have you talk about your availability as a trainer, how people can get a hold of you, anything that you'd like to say in terms of getting the word out about Matt Stegner's training and consulting program.
Well, I really appreciate that. Yeah, I've been very blessed that I've gotten very busy, and I'm grateful for that. I do have a website, mstegnerconsulting.com. I also try to remain active on LinkedIn and post articles and different things of interest. But if anybody's interested in anything that I talked about, certainly can reach out to me on my website. And if we can make it work, I would love to. Yeah, just so grateful for you and grateful for this opportunity. To your audience, I want to acknowledge that professional development in this arena, it's way easier to flip on an analysis of the Super Bowl. But the fact that people listen to you, and I've listened to other episodes that you've done, Dave, I really want to show my gratitude to you and to your audience, their willingness when nobody's looking to try to be better at their job, whether it be advocacy, out there doing prevention, prosecutors and cops. This is a heavy topic that not a lot of us like to talk about, but for you to provide this platform for so many people to learn and pick up on these things, I just want to express my gratitude to you and the audience, because it means a lot.
And I want to express my gratitude to you and to my audience. I'll tell you that I reached out to Matt through an email, and he responded immediately when I asked him if he would be on the show. Yes, I want to be on your show. I get a lot of questions when I ask people if they would be on my show, but Matt just jumped right in, and I can't thank you enough for being here and for sharing what you've shared in depth and stories of where we came from and where we're at today and how you do things and why you do what you do. Thank you very much for being here and for sharing all that you've shared. It's amazing, and your work is commendable. So thank you.
Well, thank you. The honor was mine for sure. Thanks for having me on, Dave.
Absolutely. I think maybe we should do it again in a year or so, see where we're at and what changes we may have seen or not seen that need to be talked about.
I would love to. Let's get it on the calendar.
You bet.
Talk to you soon.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I want to express my heartfelt gratitude and appreciation to Matt Stegner for taking time out of his busy schedule to record this episode with me. And I hope each of you gained some insights into the perspectives and viewpoints that Matt shared with us. It's an honor to have Matt as a friend, and even more so, to see him doing amazing work in training and consulting, bringing justice to survivors of rape and sexual assault. Thanks again, Matt. Keep doing what you're doing. I want to encourage all of you to help bring justice to victims and survivors. One of the best ways to do this is to start by believing when a victim or survivor reaches out to tell their story, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault, and because it's time that we start to normalize these conversations in order to reduce the impact of rape culture in our society. Please leave me a 5-star rating on this podcast platform and email me a note of encouragement and support. Your emails are fuel to my soul in keeping this podcast going. My email address is in the episode notes. I'd truly appreciate hearing from you. Thank you again for being here, and be sure to tune in next Tuesday for a new and impactful episode right here on Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. We'll see you next week.